farm workers stand to be put at risk by a new proposal from a state senator in Olympia here in Washington state. This has to do with collective bargaining, and it's being promoted as a benefit for workers. But would the impact really help farm workers, or would it actually put them at risk of coercion and manipulation, pressure from employers, from unions, possibly others? There are a lot of concerns about this right now as this bill is rolled out in Olympia. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us here on this edition of the Save Family Farming Ag Exchange. I'm Dylan Honcoop, Communications Director with Save Family Farming. Ben Tyndall joins us. He's our Executive Director as well. We're going to be sharing Executive Director Tyndall's testimony from a couple of days ago as he had a chance to sound off on one of this slate of bills that would roll this concept out. So Ben will be getting to more of that a little bit later as we talk about this afternoon. Just off the top though, real quick, I want to get your take on what's the problem here with this bill. Again, a lot of people saying this would be good for workers. I think there's the assumption that it would mean higher wages. I don't know if that's a foregone conclusion. Maybe more protections, even though workers have many protections already in law in Washington state. What's the concern, and why should particularly farm workers be opposed to this?
Yes. Well, I'll give us a real quick update and kind of a version of this. And then I know we have a guest or two that they'll be able to speak a little more in depth on some of the legislative side of it. But as far as there is really a slew of bills, we are aware of about four, but just that have hit one right after the other. We had one hearing on Monday, two on Tuesday that we were watching, and one yesterday on Wednesday. And we, Save Family Farming, I went out to Olympia on Tuesday, was able to testify on, in particular, on SB 6045. This legislation, and several of them really touch on this, the idea of unionization of farm workers. We believe, we know farm workers have the right to be protected, to be respected, to ensure that they have fair employment practices. That is not a question at all in our mind. We want to see the different pieces put in place that are going to ensure that they have their voice and that they are protected and they feel safe and represented well in the workplace. The issue is that these bills are putting in place certain kind of key components that are really removing farm workers' voice and their ability to really make employment and decisions for themselves, and turning that over effectively to activists or union leaders. And we want to see if a farm worker wants the ability to unionize and come together and turn some of that responsibility over to the unions, that they have the right and the ability to do that in a fair and just way where they make the decisions for themselves as a unit. The issue we really saw, one, with several of these bills is this card check or cross check component that is placed into these bills that in essence turns that ability and that decision to unionize over, one, to the unions and to the state, in particular the public employment agency that really regulates public employees, but really doesn't have the experience and the knowledge base to understand, one, agriculture as a whole, but really the migratory and the seasonality component of agriculture. They're really not equipped to oversee agriculture employees. And so the issue is, one, is the agency equipped and knowledgeable and understand the complexities of agriculture, which we believe they really don't. And we think that this gives an unfair rule and decision over to the unions. Like we've said, we'll show some of that testimony in a minute, but the idea that we want to protect against corruption and coercion among employers and the way that they may treat their employee, we want to see protections against those. Absolutely. We also want to see protections against corruption and coercion with unions, using this as a tool to simply take employee dues and receive more money. Ultimately, in the end, is the union the one that is getting the benefit, or are the farm workers actually getting their voices heard and using this as an opportunity to share? So we really tried to make those kind of key points in the testimony and with press statements and things we've been putting out on us online and so forth. But that really is kind of the top two concerns that we really have, is farm worker voices are being jeopardized in this legislation, and their voice is in essence being given over to an organization to make those decisions for them.
Now, we are hoping for 9th District Washington State Senator Mark Schoesler, a Republican from Ritzville, to join us here momentarily. He was in one of these, multiple of these, but one in particular, though, where Ben testified a couple of days ago, wanting to get his reaction this afternoon as this process moves forward down in Olympia. It appears maybe he's having some video feed difficulties, so we're standing by, hopefully, to be able to have Senator Schoesler join us momentarily. But as we wait for Senator Schoesler, Ben, certainly this is going to affect farms. This would present right off the bat a huge amount of complication, a big change in how a farm's relationship would go with its workers when you really have a union organization potentially in between, if a union occurs, if a union is certified. And it's, again, that process of certification that we have questions about with this concern about card check. Farming is very concerned about this. They're concerned about the complication. They're even more concerned about the cost at a time when very little margin exists to have anything. In fact, we're talking about labor costs eating up even more than what farmers are bringing in for their crops in many cases. So there's a lot of concern there. But if this is to be about protecting and taking care of farm workers, first and foremost, we should make sure that it is actually protective and beneficial to them even before we have that conversation. And that's why we at Safe Family Farming here have talked extensively already about the harms that this type of proposal presents to farm workers. This isn't your grandfather's union. The way it's being presented, the trappings that come with this is not what most people understand. As far as unionization and collective bargaining in America, it would not fall under the auspices of the National Labor Relations Act and the National Labor Relations Board, which governs those things in many areas nationally. Most industries are governed by that. Farming historically was exempt from that, dating back to the beginnings of the National Labor Relations Act for important purposes, and that's one of the concerns here. But it would be regulated by a state agency. Big concerns already there for protections for farm workers. And then this card check process where a union could be certified without a free and fair secret ballot election, like you were talking about for farm workers, which would put them at risk of this kind of manipulation and coercion. Those are these big concerns for farm workers. Again, we're standing by, waiting for Washington State Senator Mark Schoesler to join us. We also have a couple of other guests who will be with us, hopefully momentarily. In the meantime, though, while we're waiting for Senator Schoesler, let's go back to that testimony from Tuesday, Ben, where you actually were in the room as the chair of the House, or excuse me, the Senate Labor and Workplace Standards Committee was meeting, hearing one of the bills of this slate of bills set to roll this idea out. They need to change a few things in state law to make this work. But kind of the crux of it is Senate Bill 6045. Am I correct? That really kind of underscores this move to roll out collective bargaining for farm workers who, again, have historically been exempt, ostensibly to help farm workers, but again, in a way, in a manner that most Americans aren't familiar with, and that we are very concerned would be harmful actually to the very people it's supposed to protect. So this is the hearing where Senator Rebecca Saldana, the chair of the committee and a sponsor of the bill, is hearing public input on this. Let's go to Ben's testimony while we await State Senator Schoesler to hear his comments and his reaction, even from being in the room there. But here we have, again, Ben Tyndall on Tuesday commenting, testifying before the Washington State Senate Labor and Workplace Standards.
Very much. For the record, I appreciate Chair Saldana and committee. My name is Ben Tyndall. I'm the executive director with Save Family Farming. We believe farm workers, they have the right to respect, fair treatment, a living wage, and we understand this legislation, unfortunately, would place some of those rights into question. SB 6045 pushes a card check or cross-check process instead of a free and fair secret ballot voting process. The secret ballots exist to protect individual choice, and when that protection is taken away, workers do not gain power, organizations gain power. And workers should never be coerced or manipulated by an employer, and workers should never be coerced or manipulated by a union. Card check creates a system where farm workers' voice is given away to an organization, and where privacy and meaningful safeguards are unfortunately removed. We are not opposed to unionization. We are opposed to a card check process which takes away a worker's right to a free and fair vote and replaces it with a system that's ripe for coercion. We've seen this play out in California, where reports of union misrepresentation, abuse of authority, migrant workers were pressured into signing cards under false pretenses. We understand good intentions do not necessarily guarantee good outcomes. And until safeguards are in place to ensure farm workers' voices are protected, we ask you to oppose SB 6045. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so again, that was Tuesday. Ben Tyndall here with us on the Ag Exchange, testifying before the State Senate Committee on this issue. We do have State Senator Mark, and we will have more from that testimony, because immediately after the clip we just watched, Senator Rebecca Saldana, the sponsor of the bill, had a line of questioning that was rather interesting, and the truth about this bill seemed to have gotten a bit warped in her back and forth, her exchange with staff in the hearing room. Ben was able to correct that briefly, but we need to break that down, what the truth really is. In the meantime, let's join Washington State Senator Mark Schoesler from the 9th District. Senator Schoesler, you were in the room for that hearing. You've been following this issue. It's been talked about for some time. Certainly, it has been a big concern of the farming community. We're talking about this afternoon as well, though, the negative that this represents for farm workers themselves. What was your sense of the feeling in the room as people talked about that? Did they grasp that part of this? There were a lot of farm workers there on hand to testify, right?
Well, the farm workers were there largely didn't speak English. So if I were to mention these things, they didn't understand it. And I think Ben had excellent points as well about that.
And Senator Schoesler, it sounds like your audio is maybe cutting out a little bit. I think we may still have you there. Talk a bit more about your concerns about this and what this means for agriculture.
Well, right now we've had presentations that this is the worst time in agriculture in 40 years. Something that could disrupt production agriculture is a nightmare.
I think a lot of people are very concerned about this. This is a very difficult time already for agriculture in Washington State. Your background is as a farmer yourself, and a lot of people may not know that, as a grain grower there in Eastern Washington, correct?
Yeah, my family came in 1886, and I spent much of my career representing not just dryland agriculture, but labor-intensive Columbia Basin agriculture. And that's where you see the really time-sensitive commodities. Asparagus has to be cut at least once a day. Cherries have a window of days or hours to get picked. And if they do, they have to know they're going to the packing shed to chill, sort, and ship. Any disruption, the crop is over. And sometimes that commodity starts harvest at a price that can support a higher salary. By the middle of harvest, it can't. There's so many fluctuations that it's possible to predict what you would be able to do.
It really remains to be seen, if this were to all roll out, what the negotiations would be over. When you look at fruit growers, bringing back not even enough cash for their crop to cover their labor bill. The number reported, and John Devaney, the director over at the Washington State Tree Fruit Association in the Seattle Times just this past weekend, an editorial really calling out some tough numbers there, showing that in 2023, what farmers paid for labor was 108% of what they were bringing in for their crops. Well, do the math there. That means they can't even pay their labor bills. They're going into debt just to pay their labor bill, not to mention all of the other costs that go into growing a crop to be able to bring that to market. Do we value agriculture here in Washington State? Do we value the grains, the fruits, all of the dairy products, the beef, and the list goes on, the vegetables that we grow here in Washington State? A lot of people would say, yes, they absolutely do. Well, that comes at a cost. It's difficult to do. And we cannot continue to burden agriculture and expect that this will stay and continue here. Senator Schoesler, we're having a little bit of a difficulty again with the audio. I want to go back to you one more time real quickly. What's the answer here for agriculture that's very concerned about further pressures, and farm workers who are concerned that they're going to be caught up and potentially be pawns in this political game that's playing out before us right now as well? I mean, one question is about this bill and what the vote is there, but I think there's a bigger question about this whole slate of bills and about a lot of the other pressures, even in this short session for agriculture. A lot of folks sounding the alarm. We need to do something different.
Well, I think a lot of well-intended people raised the minimum wage to the highest in America, which led to mechanization and fewer jobs. Then, well-intended people demanded ag overtime. And the workers come and say, why do we have to quit working after 4 days? Well, 50% more is not sustainable. And that's the worker talking. And the person that's losing money every acre can't afford to lose any more. Hence, Apple's going.
And I think, again, having some trouble with the audio connection there. I want to thank again Washington State Senator Mark Schoesler for being with us this afternoon as we tackle this issue. It continues to unfold in Olympia because it's a complex process that they're having to go through. Multiple pieces of state law have to be changed to have collective bargaining for farm workers. And again, this is ostensibly to improve the lives of farm workers, to offer them better protections, potentially better wages. And a lot of people look forward to that and think, how could you be against that? But the question is, will this actually provide any better protections? Are there any better wages to be had before farms absolutely fold? And then in the process of unionization and collective bargaining, are farm workers themselves being put at risk by the process, which is not your typical secret ballot certification process? That what they're talking about would mean the lion's share of these, the vast majority of these kinds of efforts would have to use a card check process, which requires workers to publicly state their intention to support a union, which leaves them open to pressure from their employer, from a union, from other players in this. There are a lot of concerns about this. Ben Tyndall, executive director with Save Family Farming, still with us. I wish we could have had a better connection there with Senator Schoesler. We so much appreciate him taking the time to chat with us this afternoon about this issue. More importantly, the work that he does on this issue, tracking these things. He was in the room there in that hearing that we played the clip from earlier. We will get to that kind of interesting exchange that you had, Ben, with Senator Saldana in just a few moments. But first, let's see if we can go to Alma Torres-Jones. Alma, I'm hoping you're with us here this afternoon, even though I'm seeing the spinning screen. Ben, I don't know. It looks like we may not have Alma with us right now. She's an orchard owner, former farm worker herself in the Wenatchee area, hoping to get her input. She shares some of our concerns about this effort in Olympia, and what's been going on with that, what the truth really is, and what the impact will be to farm workers. That, I think, was a poignant statement that you've made, and that we've also said in some of the content that we've produced here at Save Family Farming, from your wisdom on this, Ben, which was, you can have the greatest intentions in the world, but what makes a difference is when the rubber meets the road. What's the real outcome? And the outcomes and the expected outcomes are so much more important than any good intentions going into something like this.
Right. Well, that's the issue. Like we said earlier, there is no real question on, do farm workers have the right, or do they have the right to organize themselves? Do they have the rights to fair employment? Do they have the right to have their voices heard? Should they be respected in the workplace? Absolutely. There's no question about that. The question is, what is the correct process? And you want to make sure that the process isn't wide open to coercion, to manipulation. We've heard, Dylan, you've had conversations with Jesse Rojas on the Farming Show just this past week, talking about the stories that they've seen in California, where this has played out over the past several years. And this is not just, the sky is falling, we're making up hypothetical situations to be concerned about. We actually have documented reports from California in particular, where they have seen corruption and where they have seen manipulation and coercion, and unions going into areas and coercing individuals, farm workers, to register for card check, or to sign their card, and to turn over their autonomy and their agency to make decisions for themselves over to the union, and then being used under false pretenses for things that employee may or may not actually want, and potentially going against the employee's own decisions, because they, in essence, turn that agency over to the union. And we want to protect against those kind of things, just like we want to, again, protect against what is going on if an employer is manipulating or over abusing their authority. We want protections against that. We want those protections as well against the unions that may or may not necessarily always be working in the employee's best interest, but sometimes in the self-interest of the organization. And that really is kind of that line, that if an employee group wants to go into a union agreement and do some collective bargaining as a group, that is fine. They have that authority and that right. But we want to make sure that agency and that right remains with the farm worker, and that they're not turning that over to someone else under false pretenses or manipulation.
Ben, you talk about Jesse Rojas, and he was on the Farming Show here just this past weekend, talking about this issue, talking about these concerns and the history in California. He's based down there, formerly with the Pick Justice movement, that has dealt with a lot of the corruption that has cropped up around collective bargaining, sadly, in the state of California, as they've tried to manage that also at the state level down there. And it's been there for decades now. It's their ALRB, Ag Labor Relations Board, that is California specific, based there in Sacramento. And it's become very tied up in state government, in politics, and a lot of other things, and has become corrupt, as the UFW, the United Farm Workers Union, has basically run the gamut on that board and taken control of it for its own ends, kind of a conflict of interest that somehow has slipped through the cracks and has resulted in a lot of abuses down there. But the situation that you're talking about with card check in specific, which for a long time also was not the law of the land in California for farm workers as well, but that's something more recently that, from my understanding, the Biden administration actually pressured the governor of California to enact or to sign. He had been, had his heels dug in and refused to do that, to sign that bill. And now that it's rolled out, the specific situation that we're talking about, or that we've heard about in California, was actually a legal case that was won against the United Farm Workers Union, because it had been uncovered that the United Farm Workers had been leveraging COVID money, that they were promising to workers, telling them that if they sign these cards, they would get I forget the dollar figure, but a significant amount of COVID money, checks for that. And maybe they did. I don't recall specifically. I think people were getting these payouts, but again, it was conditioned on them signing the cards. A lot of workers then testifying after, they didn't even realize what they were signing the cards for. Was to do this card check process to certify a union. So that's not even what they wanted, but none of that would have been possible if a secret ballot would have been required there. You cannot bribe people when their ballot is secret, because you don't know. You can't say, well, we're going to give you this amount of money if you vote one way or the other, because they are able to place their vote in secret. That's the reason we have secret elections the way that we do nationally, at the federal level, the state level, the local level. This is how things operate in America. And it's a step backwards from protection for voters, in this case, particularly farm workers, who would be voting for unionization or collective bargaining under this type of proposal that's been rolled out, in a way where they're forced to do it publicly. And again, State Senator Rebecca Saldana suggesting it was an option to do card check. It's not an option. It was really a misnomer that she was forwarding about this bill. Under almost all circumstances, farm workers under the proposal currently in Olympia, they would be forced to use the card check process. It's only a very small sort of scenario where a secret ballot could be used that's really not germane to the main conversation here about how this would work. It would be a rarity if ever used here in Washington State, at least under the current conditions. Ben, I think we still have you with us. Also, Alma Torres-Jones joining us now. Alma, great to have you with us here on the Safe Family Farming Ag Exchange, talking about this situation that's unfolding in Olympia with this idea of collective bargaining. But again, not your grandfather's kind of unionization, the kind of unionization that Americans are used to having, one that uses card check, that we're trying to explain and communicate to folks. This isn't a minor difference. This isn't splitting hairs. This is a hugely different process that puts farm workers at risk. Alma, your background is, you're in the orchard business now. You're an orchard owner, but you grew up as a farm worker. You know this scene. What is the feeling? Are farm workers aware of what's coming down the pike? Are they aware of what's contained in this and just how bad this could be?
No, they're not aware of it. All this stuff is being done to help them without their knowledge or any input at this time.
So talk about talk about your concerns about this. How do you see, this effort to do collective bargaining? Again, as I said earlier this hour, and a lot of people say, hey, this could be a great thing. That's not how you see it.
No, because what I see it as, it's going to be open, the card check system. It's going to be where there's going to be room for coercion and manipulation on both sides, because it's not a secret. And when you go out there, people are going to be pushing the workers to vote for something in retaliation. One of the things would be specifically if H-2As are going to be involved in this. Our H-2A workers needing to sign pro to be able to get a contract to come up to the states to do H-2A work. And the same thing would be with our local workers. Do they feel like they have to agree to it or oppose to it because everybody knows how they voted?
Have you seen this kind of thing in the past, in your years of, you grew up as a migrant farm worker, you guys were moving around the country, before your family settled here in Washington State. You've probably seen a lot of things. I mean, that goes back to California in the early days of collective bargaining there, the post-Cesar Chavez era, where they really kind of paved the way for this, but sadly, not necessarily in a good way. We hear more and more bad things about what that has become in the state of California.
I've heard about it. I do not remember living it because I was really young, but I do remember my father saying that they were trying to unionize, and at that point he was not. He did not agree with it at all, and he did. When he was working it and they were trying to unionize, he wanted to be himself independently, that he could go work and make the arrangements with the owners directly, his employers, on the type of work, and not have to be dependent on what somebody else is deciding for him. In addition to, he didn't feel like he needed to be paying union dues to somebody to speak on his behalf when he was able to do it himself.
What would you say to senators who are hearing this right now, and certainly it'll be in the state house as well? You know, there may be some skepticism. How could this be bad for workers? What would you say to convince them that there is a legitimate concern here? This is not some kind of twisted gaslighting. This is the real deal, and we have a track record to follow of what's happened in California that shows this very well could happen. It's likely, it's almost a guarantee that these things would go on.
What I would like to tell them is to actually come to the east side of the state and talk to the workers directly, the ones that are here, the ones that are willing to be to go talk to them and be heard. But don't just go based on what somebody in Olympia is saying it's a good thing. One of the things that I saw is there's a lot of things that are being proposed on this bill that are already there's laws, regulations on the same things, federally and statewide. Why are we reinventing the wheel in another bill? That's what I would say. But they really need to take the time to come into Eastern Washington, go meet with the farm workers and ask them directly, do you want to be paying dues to a union, or are you able to get a job directly with an employer without a third party? They're just putting it's more red tape on us farmers and the farm workers to try to fix something that's doesn't need to be fixed.
And that's exactly what I was going to ask you about as well. As a farmer now, what would this mean for your farm? I mean, people think about the cost, and this could prove to be very expensive. People don't think about how complicated it makes it. That's another issue, another downside of this. But what comes to mind first is that relationship between you and your employees is suddenly, by definition, different. And I'm sure that would be a very hard thing and a risk that most people don't recognize almost at all.
It's going to be detrimental to just myself, which is considered a small farmer, but also the big farmers as well. Big growers, it could be the end of farming for some people if this goes on. It's not just going to be, it's not just a small cost. It's gonna be people going out of business in Washington State. It's not a good thing, and I wish people would come over here and talk to us and listen and see the reality of things.
Certainly, if farms go out of business, it's not good for anyone. It's not good for those of us who are consumers who want to buy food and eat food that's grown in Washington State. It's certainly not good for the farmer that's going out of business, and it's not good for the farm workers either. If there's no job left because the farm closed, the orchard was cut down, it was developed into housing, and from what I understand, that's exactly what you're seeing already happening with the current conditions, the current agricultural economic climate in your area, Alma.
It is really bad right now. There's a lot of orchards that are being torn down. Housing is being put in, and it's going to get worse. Right now, all aspects of agriculture is suffering the price, the cost, rising cost. And then we have representatives, senators, other people that want to push stuff, legislators that want to push stuff for the good of that don't want that assistance. They're not requesting it. They're doing fine. And sometimes I wish they would just not try to fix a problem that is not there, that they are creating themselves, like Saldana, for example. And I can say this about this is I actually, a couple years ago, I did try to meet with Rebecca Saldana, and she did not give me the time to meet with her about a different issue. So how can I put any faith in her when she does not take the time to listen to farm workers, and not just the big growers or big farmers, but a small family farm?
That's a very good question, and certainly, it causes you to ask about motives. What is the motive if this senator who is pushing this idea isn't interested in what the farm workers themselves or the small farm owners actually think? Then what is the motive behind this? Again, Alma Torres-Jones, an orchardist, an orchard owner and farmer in the Wenatchee Valley area with an extensive background as a farm worker herself. It's how she was raised, the community that she was raised in. We appreciate you being with us here this afternoon to share your concerns and a perspective from that community. Alma, thank you very much. I want to go now to Enrique Gastelum with the the Worker and Farmer Labor Association. He's their CEO there at WAFLA. Enrique, we talked about this on the radio over the weekend. Now the hearings have happened. We voiced a lot of these concerns. I was disappointed to see these concerns not highlighted even more during the hearings. And I wonder if even the farm workers representing there and testifying in favor of this are aware of just how legitimate these concerns are. I hope that they can see what's actually going on here, and that they are not being manipulated already. It's scary when you see a group of people that is brought to Olympia to comment on this, and everyone comes into the room and there seems to already be kind of a group mantra. Let's actually consider this and look at what is truly at stake here. And it's not as good as I think some people have been led to believe. I'm really concerned about that.
Well, and you hit it right there, Dylan. Here's what there's a dream being sold to these farm workers, and I'm with you. I think they are being manipulated. That they're being sold this dream that the union's going to come in and get them all these wages and all these benefits, and they're going to work from 7 in the morning till 11 a.m. in the morning, and they're going to be able to take a 2-hour break. And there's nothing stopping the farm who's already on the brink from just shutting down.
And who wins then?
That story is not being told at all. If the farm is bleeding money as we speak, and it's been bleeding it for years. I mean, we just had the USDA in September had that report where we're, we flipped 1 point some, $1 billion in cash for the industry. And so it's like the farm workers that are being sold this thing of the union are not comprehending. Once you get a union contract, the rigidity, there is no flexibility to the relationship anymore. If you guys want to work extra hours, or if you want to work or the farm or the company wants to give you some time off, that all has to be negotiated. You lose the flexibility of, hey, we'd like to promote you into this job or that job, or, you were a field hand and now we want to make you a supervisor. Sorry, got to read the union contract, and we have to see if there's progression built in and all of that. And so you lose all of that dynamic, and none of that is being explained to this farmer community. And then what was very interesting is, like, when Edgar Franks was testifying, one of the representatives asked him, so how much are your dues? It was surprising to me that he hemmed and hawed for about 30 or 40 seconds before he would disclose what their union dues were.
Mm-hmm.
Like, those are your union dues, Edgar. Why do you not have that number off the top of your head?
Yeah.
I can tell you WAFLA's membership dues, they're $300 a year. Took me less than a second to say that.
Yep.
Why are you not so quick. You're quick to blast the farmers and other stuff, but you're not quick to say how the union actually works.
Well,
Or
union dues.
or about the rumors of what potentially FUJ was doing with union dues years ago. Trips to Hawaii, brand new pickups. Where are those stories at? And where's that being told to the farmers? Like, how is the money going to be managed? Who's in charge of it? Does it act? What if the farm shuts down for 4 months? Are you guys going to cover my wages? This isn't like an automakers or a Boeing or an Amazon place where it's operating 365, 24 hours a day, where there's billions and billions of dollars flowing, right? Our farms are on the brink. It's seasonal in nature. You guys are going to go do a strike. It can take one strike to destroy a farm.
Yeah.
And the whole piece on card check, to me, our American values are built on secret ballot. Every November, every general election we go to for an initiative, voting for our representatives, voting for your local school board.
Yeah.
We cast a ballot in a box, and nobody knows what I voted for.
Yeah.
But
Well, I think this issue of union dues is exactly why card check is so important. Workers can legitimately do that if they want to, and to put it into terms that most citizens who may or may not be involved with unions or collective bargaining maybe are more familiar with, you're essentially voting to tax yourself. And if you want to do that, you absolutely have the right to do that in this country. People do it all the time. I can decide if I want to vote for the new high school that's proposed here where I live or not. But I get to vote with a secret ballot, and nobody can influence me or pressure me, shame me, try to, tell me I may or may not have a job, or maybe I could get a $5,000 check if I vote one way or the other. That's all left alone for good reason. And it's always been that way in this country, back to no taxation without representation.
Yeah,
But
and
this is exactly what we're talking about here. If workers vote not in a protected secret ballot way, but in a card check manner of voting, if you even want to call it that, to tax themselves, and they're pressured to do it, what is the legitimacy of that tax, of those dues? You're taking money again out of all workers' checks, not just those that showed a card or did not. And even them showing a card is dubious because of the potential pressure and coercion. But you're talking about all workers in the workplace then. Again, if it's a majority of the workers with a secret ballot, workers have the right to do that. Through this process, I don't know how people could feel good about pushing this forward. What did you think about this false suggestion from Senator Saldana that there would be the option one way or the other? We do have a clip that we can play here in a few minutes when Ben, our executive director, who was on with us a little bit earlier, and he'll rejoin us, pushed back against that suggestion from the senator. She was absolutely wrong in suggesting that workers would have the option or the choice of either secret ballot or card check, when that's not the way this proposal is written at all.
No, you had to have two competing unions is the only thing I think I remember from the bill. But in most cases, it's going to be a single union that's been talking to workers from that workforce probably for several months, meetings in living rooms, restaurants, churches. They get one or two, and then they start to sort of get a couple of them riled up, and they have these outside meetings. And it's all the second they sign a card check, they have signed away they're saying, I want a paper, I want a contract, and then there is no more vote after that. Then it's your union goes and negotiates on your behalf what is best in your best interest as a farm worker.
Yeah, it doesn't matter then if you know the farmer really well, or you have a good relationship, or you have a good track record there. That's all thrown out the window because it's you no longer have that kind of contact.
Right, exactly. So yeah, it threw me off where it feels like a shell game where there's we all read the bill. It's very scary, the provisions in there. And to have Senator Saldana state that, I was like, I heard it was good for Ben for pushing back, because he was totally right. There is no choice of a secret ballot. There was many trigger points that you had to get to, and it was after card check was already signed by some folks, but you've got some competing going on in there. And then the whole other part, okay, we're trying to make it easier for farm workers to unionize, what happens in a couple of years when they're tired of their dues getting taken and the union's not doing what they want? It was almost going to take an act of God where a worker's going to have to hit this very precise 30-day window and know the exact right people to file a deed of certification with to deunionize, right? And so it's and what happens to that H-2A worker that signed some card check and he's out in Oaxaca, Mexico, and he actually can't be in the United States to hit that 30-day window and doesn't live in Washington State, and he doesn't want to be represented anymore because he's not getting what he needed. And again, I'm not saying I'm against unions. I think unions have their place, but we need balance in giving the workers the choice. Just if we're going to make it such, it should be their true free choice without any fear or risk of coercion. And then on the flip side, the day they are tired of a union, they should have it as just an easy way to get out.
Yeah, exactly right.
If card check is such a great thing, then on the decertification side, why don't we just make it easy? Hey, one farm worker could go around and get a bunch of cards signed by workers, and if they get a majority of them, the union's decertified.
Yeah.
Let's
Excellent.
make it that easy. Modify the bill right now. Okay, great. Now it's fair.
Well, Enrique, I got a question for you, actually. And one, I appreciate this information. And I'm curious, and you may not know this right off the top. I'm not looking to put you on the spot unfairly, but do you know, are there other, I know of one union that is registered with the state of Washington that would be eligible. And I completely understand, they would be activistic and trying to rally up some support. Is there more than one labor union focused on farm workers in the state? I know of
We have the two.
FUJ. There are two?
FUJ and United Farm Workers. That's
Okay, there you go. Okay.
And what's interesting in the case of United Farm Workers is, since the Cesar Chavez days, their home base is California.
Right.
California has the largest number of local and seasonal farm workers in the entire United States. I mean, we're talking, I think the number is 800,000.
Yeah, by far the
Big
largest.
farms too, really big farms.
Right.
Why do they not have widespread farm worker unions if the United Farm Workers was so great?
Yeah, less than 1%, far less now than 1%.
Far less
And they've
than-
been dwindling in California. Their numbers keep sinking. And there's some question about, is that why? And we talked about this last summer, even on the farming show. Is this potentially one of the motives of United Farm Workers looking for greener pastures in Washington state rather than California, where we hear from Jesse Rojas and other advocates down there that farm workers are kind of tired of this game and realize that it wasn't a particular benefit to them. And in the case of, which was at one time the largest stone fruit farm, I think, in the world, Rowan Farms, farm workers found that the whole system was quite corrupt and actually stacked against them, where they couldn't get out of the union. That we're just talking about, Enrique. A lot of people think, well, that's a stretch to worry about decertifying a union. Well, it's a real thing that workers should be able to do. Are they getting a good deal or are they not? Because of the corruption that developed down there in California, they couldn't even get out of this thing for years. They had to protest in mass in Sacramento to get the state to finally move on this issue. It was an abject nightmare for farm workers down there. And then we talk about this card check process here in Washington state, where we're told this whole idea is underpinned by social justice. What they're talking about rolling out with card check, at least based on basic American values, is actually expanding or creating a new entire social injustice by this kind of process. I want, Ben with us now on the conversation, Enrique as well. Both of you guys are much better versed in how Olympia works than I am. What happens to this bill from here? We've had some hearings on some of these pieces. There are a lot of moving pieces to this legislatively. And this is going to be one to watch, because I understand the proponents of this want to move very quickly in this short legislative session with this proposal.
Yes, we actually have two bills related to collective bargaining that we're tracking. One is this one where I testified and Ben testified on Tuesday. I'm losing time here, but that was ag specific. Okay. There's this other broader one that says we want to cover every worker in the state of Washington that's not covered by the National Labor Relations Act, which potentially means every mom and pop coffee stand that's in Linden, Washington with 3 or 4 workers could face unionization. Every diner on your local road down in Bellingham that you like to go eat your steak and eggs, where they employ 10 workers, could face unionization. There's no exemptions for small businesses. Anybody, your housekeepers, your whoever, would be able to just start unionizing. And so that one, you know, for the larger business community is extremely alarming because, again, there's reasons federal Congress put protections in place because we could literally have halts to, you know, we could have the shutting down of, you know, local economies, you know, with some of this unionization. Yeah. So, you know, next what comes, I believe, with this collective one is obviously a lot of us from the community want this bill to die, right? The collective bargaining one on the farm worker one, because it's like, look, it just needs to go away. It's obviously the leadership in Olympia is tone deaf to what is happening to the dire straits farming is in right now. They're just tone deaf to it, ignoring it, acting like it's going to go away. I mean, this is a drum that's been beating louder and louder for a good half a decade now. And it is here. It's not that it's coming. It's been here and it is here, and the hole is getting deeper. And so, you know, the idea would be anybody out in the farming community, anybody in the local community that cares about agriculture, cares about the viability, call your legislators, speak up on this bill. I'm sure you can go to Safe Family Farming, WAFLA, Tree Fruit, all these different associations. We have the bills posted, you know where they're at. Sign in, write in. So with this short session, it's kind of been crickets a little bit right now. I think they had the hearings. You know, Senator Soldani says, you know, I think she even called out me personally. Hey, I'm gonna contact you. I haven't gotten a contact yet. You know, so I'm hopeful that was a truthful statement. But you know, my email and phone number can be found right on our website. So I haven't been, you know, contacted yet about major amendments that we would propose if they were trying to move this forward. It is clear too, there was zero stakeholdering done with the employer community leading up to this. We were all pounding the ground last year when we saw the cannabis worker bill saying, we know the farm worker one is coming next. And Ortiz self lied in a hearing and says, oh, no, this has nothing to do with farm workers. We have no intention to do that. And she's chairing or presenting this bill on the flip side of the house as we're testifying there in the Senate. And so if we can't get the bill killed, it moves then to, I think, executive committee is where they start talking it through. And then they'll discuss if they want to put it up for one more hearing and vote after that. So our hope would be for it to die. And, you know, there's a pretty good fiscal note too on this. You know, we have a legislature right now. I don't know what the last numbers were, but we're a couple $2 billion in the hole. And I think when the question was asked, they're saying this is going to come from the general fund, which has no money. And so they'd have to peel off $1 million a year to run this farm worker collective bargaining thing. And I'm just trying to figure out where they're even going to get the money from to administer something like this. And I've heard some rumors too, the public employees, the PERC group, they've never dealt with ag. They say they don't have the resources to even touch this or work this. And so you're just adding more layers and more work to even, you know, an administrative group that's not even prepared to deal with something like this and the onslaught of the unionization efforts that are going to start coming. So,
yeah. Dylan, I'll add to that. Just Enrique is completely accurate in all he was saying. Just I do want to encourage anyone that are watching this. You know, there are a number of stops in this process. So this is not individuals will have a number of opportunities to be able to reach out to connect with your legislators throughout this process. Absolutely. The next step is several of these bills had hearings throughout the past few days. They will then go into executive session if they want to move these out of committee. And so the legislators in those respective committees will then be able to determine that. So there's a point where individuals can reach out to the representatives or the senators who are present in those committees, present your position, share them, send emails, things like that. Then, as was said, it has a fiscal note, substantial fiscal note. Most likely, it will then go to some sort of fiscal committee, be it appropriations, ways and means, something like that. And so again, it will have the opportunity to be heard. Individuals will have the opportunity to present testimony and share on the bill again, and present information to the legislator, and then it will go to the floor of either the Senate or the House, depending on what chamber it originated in, and then it will go and ultimately flip over, and the process will start again and in the opposite chamber. And so there are just I want individuals to know that this is relatively the beginning of what could be a long process. We are in a short, truncated session, so things will have a very faster clip to it, but know that there are many opportunities to have your voice heard, to reach out, to communicate with your leaders and your legislators, your senators, representatives. Take advantage of that. That really does matter. And there are a number of opportunities throughout this process for you to do that.
Yeah. Just before I jumped on here, we had somebody reach out. How can I get involved? How can I speak up on this? And you don't need to wait for a hearing or whatnot. At a minimum, start calling your local representatives. Get it right to Senator Saldana's office, right to Ortiz Self, right to, anybody that'll listen. Get the message out there and explain your story of, share the stories of what you're doing already to take care of your workers, right? Like Washington State has already gone above and beyond most other 50 states with wages, with benefits, with, paid family leave. So I'm left to wonder, what is left there for the union to negotiate other than the demise of the farm?
Well, and where I could, started my concerns when I brought you into the conversation, Enrique, was with, do farm workers even know the details with this? Because of how quickly this is moving, this has suddenly been rolled out. Boom, we're going to try to move this as quickly as possible. Nobody knew about it until all of a sudden it dropped. It doesn't even get the community that it's supposed to be helping, ostensibly is supposed to help, give them the opportunity to take a good hard look at, is this actually what we want? So the list of problems is long. And again, I think that the window here, there are more opportunities to comment, but it also, that window will not last forever. Again, the proponents of this, it appears to be a strategy of theirs to move this as quickly as possible, which also makes me suspicious. It makes me skeptical right off the bat. What do we have to hide here? If this is something truly everyone can embrace that is good for all, then there should be nothing to hide, no reason to move quickly and to make this less than transparent and available for everyone involved to participate. Again, Enrique Gastelum, CEO of WAFLA, the Worker and Farmer Labor Association. Thank you for being with us. I don't want to burn up all of your time. I do want to get to this clip of Senator Saldana's question for Ben. So we're going to move to that now, but I wanted to thank you for being with us here for this conversation here this afternoon on the Save Family Farming Ag Exchange. I do also want to thank our sponsor making this conversation possible, the Kennewick Irrigation District, supporting these conversations that we've begun to have here on Save Family Farming via social media that we call the Ag Exchange. Back to this issue and the testimony that you delivered. We played a clip of that earlier in our conversation this afternoon, Ben. We just played your testimony, which you had prepared to deliver. Immediately after that, the chair, who's also, again, the chief proponent, the sponsor of the bill up for question, which is kind of the heart of this collective bargaining push, Senator Rebecca Saldana had a question for you, and I wanted to share that so people could see her question. Well, I have some comments as we go, so we may start and stop this here a moment. But here again is Senator Saldana asking Ben a question a couple of days ago during this hearing. Let's take
legislation before us. Is there only card check as an option, or can it also be done through an election? More formal.
Okay, so I'm going to pause right there. This is the sponsor of the bill, She is the chair of the committee. She does not know the answer to this. That already on its face to me is troubling. This is a critical foundational part of this legislation. Now, maybe she knows the answer, but once it clarified, I'm not sure why she would be playing that sort of game. So I really have to ask right off the bat, and am I wrong in saying that, Ben? She should have known the answer to that question.
Well, at one, yes, I would think you would know this. And I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist, or I don't want to read too much into something that I really don't know for sure. But one, just for clarification, she didn't ask me the question, and that may be very strategic in that if you ask a individual who's testifying a question, the individual really kind of, the clock stops, and that individual has the time to elaborate, to share more. She very specifically did not ask me a question. She asked staff the question, the staff, the committee staff that was over the bill. So one, she very specifically asks staff a question, not the individual testifying. Two, ideally, she would know these things. Now, maybe she did or didn't, but she may have tried to, in essence, set herself up to give, to hear what she wanted to hear, and then be able to present a kind of modified understanding of the answer. And you can share that a little bit.
Let's go
what
back.
Exactly was shared.
Let's go back to the video that Ben has just here, just to set this up again. Ben has just finished his testimony that we played earlier. So you could go back to the replay of our conversation this afternoon if you do want to see that clip of what Ben had to say, very much in line with what we've been talking about this afternoon. This again is Senator Saldana's question, and I'll let it roll in then through what staff that she asked about this.
I have a question for staff. And the legislation before us, is there only card check as an option, or can it also be done through an election, more formal election process?
Both are in the bill. It depends on who is seeking, which type of organization is seeking representation, and then what the showing of interest is. But both are available.
Okay, so I'm going to pause it right there. He says both are available. Technically, that is, I guess you could say, correct, because in the bill there exist provisions where either one of those could potentially use, but the vast majority of the situations that this bill would apply to would require card check. And so that's where, yes, technically, I guess the way what he said is true, but the way he said it leaves a false impression that there's some kind of option here. He said both are available.
Right. This idea that both are available, and the farm worker or the employees, they get to decide what process they want to use. No, that is not correct. And even though the senator kind of ran with that and gave a beautifully condescending response after that.
Yeah, let's go back to that video again, what staff says, and in response to this question, and then you can hear the senator's response.
Both are in the bill. It depends on who is seeking, which type of organization is seeking representation, and then what the showing of interest is. But both are available.
Yeah. And I think it is important that there's choice, but we do have both options in there. So I understand, I hear definitely clearly the card check is not your preference.
It depends.
And even that there, she was speaking again to you. You're still at the dais where you had been delivering your remarks, your testimony, Ben. She's looking down to you saying, I understand that your preference is, secret ballot as opposed to card check, but both are available in here. Number one, that's not true.
Correct.
Number two, what she was saying it and how she was saying it was terribly condescending when you were raising a legitimate concern. And this point that she asked a question on is very important to this whole situation.
It absolutely is. And again, we have I tried to respond to that. Another individual a little bit later also very clearly responded that farm workers will not have choice depending on the circumstances. That they are very specific sections within that bill, a section 9 and a section 10, I believe, in the bill. If there's only one union that is interested or has lobbied in essence or rallied up enough interest, if there's only one union, card check is the only option. That they do not have the option for secret ballots. You do not have the option to have kind of individual choice in this process. Card check is the only one. Now, if there is no union representation, or if there are more than one union represented, then secret ballot does present itself, and that is an option. So technically, both a secret ballot and card check are represented in the legislation, but the legislation is very clear. If only one option is available, if only one eligible union is presented itself as an option to those particular employees, card check is the only option, and voice is then removed. That choice is removed.
And so that's the vast majority of situations
Absolutely.
that would arise from this whole situation. And again, are we splitting hairs politically and parsing these words? Well, it's critically important because it deals with this flawed process of card check, which could essentially not just disenfranchise a lot of workers, but actually put them in harm's way, in line for manipulation, coercion, ugly things, corruption, pressure, bribery, all these terrible kinds of things that we've been talking about today because of this flawed process. So it is deeply important how these words are parsed. Let's go back to the video again, the staff comment, and the senator's misinterpretation of what staff had just said here, as we've just explained how it's false. And then we'll take a look at your response that you were able to slip in there, which I can see this would have been a stressful moment. She didn't necessarily invite the response from you, but you took the opportunity to do it. I know being in that situation can be very intimidating, but you took an opportunity. I suppose she could have said, well, I'm going to gavel you, even though that wouldn't have been a good look. But I was very grateful that you were able to slip in with the truth and respond to this false assumption that she makes.
I think it
here.
is important that there's choice, but we do have both options in there. So I understand, I hear definitely clearly the card check is not your preference.
It depends on the situation, like Liz said.
Yeah.
In one situation, card check is the only option. Secret ballots, if there's only one union available, card check is the only option. So choice is taken away if only one option is available.
Thank you.
Okay, so there you have it. That was from Tuesday. Again, Ben Tyndall, Executive Director of Safe Family Farming, with us right now on the Ag Exchange. Often hosts many of the conversations that we have here. Again, thanks to the Kennewick Irrigation District for sponsoring, testifying in Olympia in this hearing in the State Senate. Labor and Commerce or Labor and Workplace Standards? I forget. It's different in either house. In our bicameral legislature. But that was your testimony there in Olympia on the deep concerns with this. And again, just to repeat, Ben, for anyone who may just be joining us or wants to hear again, how can people sound off on this and voice these concerns? So at least we have some kind of hope of this being taken seriously, because right now it feels like there's a concerted effort to drown out or to ignore or to even, as it almost felt there, belittle some of these concerns.
Yeah. Well, I do want to let people know, one, get involved and get engaged. You sign up for our newsletter on safefamilyfarming.org. I'll make my shameless plug, but that is a one key area or way that you can stay informed about what's going on. A lot of farm or associations, commodity groups, et cetera, have newsletters where they're sending out alerts. Sign up for those. I want to encourage you to do that. You can also go on our website, www.safefamilyfarming.org. Under one of the tabs, you'll find a Farming in Crisis. And on that, you can also sign up for our text alert system, where we will send out occasionally alerts to individuals via text message. And right on your phone, with just a couple taps of the finger, you'll be able to send an email or engage and share your comments to a particular committee or particular legislators, policy leaders, things like that. Take advantage of those. Reaching out, making your voice heard has never been easier thanks to modern technology, even in regards to making testimony and giving testimony. Both houses, both Senate and the House of Representatives, have the option or opportunity for virtual or remote testimony. And so individuals don't even have to leave the comfort of their office or their truck or their home. If you have an internet connection, you also have the opportunity to be a voice and provide that testimony. And so I want to encourage individuals. You don't have to necessarily travel all the way to Olympia and sit awkwardly in front of the committee like I did earlier this week. You can do that remotely, and your voice does matter. I will say, and I can't speak for all the different bills, but that particular bill, SB 6045, I believe it is. The senator shared how many the individuals came in and both testified as well as just signing in and making your voice if you were for the bill or if you were con against it. There were about 400 plus, a little more than 400 individuals who signed in support of the bill. There were over 600 people that signed in opposed to it. So just twice as many individuals, or I should say, about a third more individuals signed in opposed to the bill. And then we had a good showing of individuals who provided testimony. Enrique was there along with numerous others, sharing their farm story and their perspective on why this legislation would be detrimental. And so know that your voice matters. It is heard. Now, how individuals will run with it, how legislators or senators will run with that and what those decisions, time will tell. But I will say this, they were heard, and as of this afternoon, this bill does not have an executive session scheduled. Usually that means, they are still working. They're working behind the scenes. They're having to really collaborate and figure out answers to some of these issues that were brought up, because they know if we ignore it right now, it's going to keep raising its ugly head as it progresses through the legislative process. So I see that as a good sign that hopefully behind the scenes conversations are taking place, and hopefully our comments and the comments of many within the agriculture community are being recognized and heard. So.
Well, Ben, thanks for being with us here.
Yes.
And more importantly, thanks for speaking out and even testifying. And as you said, going into that awkward situation, I want to thank State Senator Mark Schoesler from the 9th District, who was able to join us
Yes.
a little bit earlier in the conversation. Also, Alma Torres-Jones, orchard owner and a former farm worker herself in the Wenatchee area. Enrique Gastelum with the Worker and Farmer Labor Association. And Ben as well. It's been an interesting conversation. There's a lot to this, a lot more than meets the eye. And thank you all for being with us, for listening. And again, thank you to the Kennewick Irrigation District for your sponsorship of these kinds of conversations here in the Save Family Farming Ag Exchange. Ben, any last word before we let folks go?
Well, nothing other than just know that Safe Family Farming is going to continue working for you all. This is something that we really take seriously, and we don't take for granted your support and the opportunity that we have to represent you both in Olympia and throughout the state. And so thank you all for those that tuned in and watched, and we'll keep the conversation going.
And definitely we will be, I'm sure, talking more about this as this unfolds in Olympia in the coming days and weeks. So thank you all for being with us this afternoon.